Uniting both the art and the science of functional medicine. Here's your host, Dr. Brad Watts.
Nutrition Heroes, welcome back to the Nutrition Hero Podcast. How the heck are you? Now, 2019 is shaping up to be an awesome year, and a couple of things I'm excited about. A book, number one. That's kind of cool. If you haven't been to drbradwatts.com, go there, put your name and email address in, and get a sample chapter of the book that's coming out, Killing Chronic Disease. I'm excited about that. Right? Gives you an opportunity to offend a few people, but then also provide some lifestyle change, some trajectory change in the health that they're experiencing. And you know, anytime that you're going to have some life change in somebody, anytime you get somebody to choose a different path, choose a different option, you have to run the risk of offending a few people. Well, this is no different. So go ahead and register there, get your sample chapter. The other thing that will do is that will put your name on a list that will allow me to contact you when we have Killing Chronic Disease Summit coming out later this year. And it's where we are hosting some of the absolute heaviest hitters in the functional medicine industry. And I'm so excited about it, you guys. We got, right now, the list is amazing. I'm just going to give you a little bit, all right, a couple of names. Not everybody, just a couple of names. But we got Dr. Ben Lynch, Dr. Jack Wolfson, Dr. Fab Mancini, and a handful of others that are the heaviest hitters in the functional medicine space today. And I'm excited, and the reason I'm excited is these people were able, like the words that we put to this podcast, the words that we put to this online summit, Killing Chronic Disease, spoke to something in them where they said, yeah, I'll do it. And I'm excited about it because they're delivering hard-hitting information in the moment, like in now time, that gives you just a taste of what's coming in the functional medicine industry. And I mean, I'm just shaking my head. It's awesome. So anyway, go ahead, drbradwatts.com, and register there, and I'll know to send you some information on the Killing Chronic Disease Summit as that comes out later this year. Now, in addition to all of these awesome doctors being able to put together some information for you, like donating their time, which I'm so excited about, this gives you a place to point your patients. Killing Chronic Disease Summit is going to be something that encourages your patients to seek out your care, not my care, your care. And it's so cool because they're not going to be able to contact me, right? They're going to be able to contact you about the content of the summit. That's why it's so cool. It's going straight to the consumer. We're going to hit over 15 million consumers coming up, and all it is to highlight functional medicine, clinical nutrition, the work that you're doing as a nutrition hero. So be excited about that. All right, another thing that I'm excited about today is our guest. We have Dr. Anne-Marie Barter out of Denver, Colorado today on the podcast. And if you've never heard Dr. Anne-Marie Barter speak, you're in for a treat. She is a functional medicine expert, which is my jam, and that's why we're talking together today. And so anyway, she and I recorded this a couple of weeks ago. I've been saving it for an opportune moment for you, and I think you're going to enjoy the conversation regarding Hashimoto's, PCOS, hormone problems, the immune system, and some of the cool things that Dr. Anne-Marie Barter has been able to find in clinical practice. Some of the stuff that she's doing. Take advantage of the information that she's giving to you today for free. If you want to contact her, go to www.altfammed.com, altfammed.com, and you can be directed her way at that website. So, questions that you have for me on the podcast, Brad at biogenetics.com. Enjoy Dr. Anne-Marie Barter. Dr. Barter, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining our tribe for the day. We appreciate it. What's going on?
Thank you so much for having me. It's early here, but I am just very, very psyched to be here. So thank you for having me on your show. So
Absolutely. Yeah, you're coming out of Denver today. That's right.
It is. Yes,
right.
It is.
So it's bright and early for you there. Thanks for joining us. So one of the things I was excited to talk to you about is your experience in the functional medicine world. I understand that you have some experience with your own family dealing with chronic disease, and and that's kind of been part of your journey. Number one, how did you get involved in chiropractic? And then number two, why functional medicine?
All right. So I started with chiropractic and functional medicine. I was introduced to that when I was in college. So I was a competitive dancer, and also I was a competitive runner. So my feet chronically hurt and constantly hurt, and then also my dancing ability could not fully go to where it needed to go because of tight muscles, muscle imbalances in my legs. But really where it started was when I was in high school. I remember going to the primary care doc and saying, I'm having really bad period cramps and I have acne all over my face. And so she said, hey, I live next door to a Different-Gel rep. And if for those of you that don't know, Different-Gel is a topical cream that you put on your face for acne. So I tried the Different-Gel because, she said, oh, this should work. Well, I had a hormone imbalance, so clearly it did not work. I go back a couple months later. She says, listen, there's nothing wrong with you. I can't help you. Fast forward 2 months. And I remember waking up and going into my mom's room and saying, hey, mom, can I stay home from school? And that was pretty rare for me because I love to go to school and I was involved in all sorts of activities there. And she said, can you stand up? I said, no, I'm just having really bad period cramps. I just need to stay home today. She said, we're going to the doctor. Well, the doctor rushes me to the emergency room, and pretty much at the end of that, my appendix was exploding that I thought was period cramps.
Wow.
And for those of you that don't know that, that's pretty serious. You can end up with sepsis or an infection systemically or all over your body.
Yeah.
So as I'm getting my organ removed, everybody's telling me how perfectly healthy I am. And I remember sitting there as a high school student questioning that. So fast forward into college, and I was a freshman in college, and finals time comes around, and I break out with all these little red hives all over my body. So I'm having a type 1 hypersensitivity reaction, right? Which I didn't know at the time. I just itched and looked like a creature from Star Wars. So I remember thinking, wow, this is really serious, and I feel terrible. And I feel like my breathing doesn't quite feel right. And so I end up in the emergency room night after night after night.
Wow.
And what I learned was I just had a Benadryl deficiency. Nobody talked to me about diet. Nobody talked to me about maybe my environment. Nobody talked to me about stress levels or what could be causing something like that. And in my situation, the hives were actually in my throat. So they were closing up. And I felt like medicine at that point had no answers. So I finally showed up into a chiropractor's office that was recommended by my sister, who's now in natural medicine as well. And anyway, this guy changed my life. He changed my diet. He adjusted my feet. So I felt amazing. Like I just felt like a completely different person. Couldn't believe that I didn't find this sooner, but it completely transformed my life. So I'm over there doing paleo back 20 years ago, and people, exactly are you doing? Why are you doing paleo? So, but it completely changed my life, and it inspired me, and I pretty much ended up here.
That's awesome. 20 years ago, paleo would have been like, are you crazy?
Low fat.
That's
Low
right.
fat back in the day.
That's right. So, all right. So you've taken that story and you've basically launched out and are helping other people. I understand that part of your focus in your practice is sorting out some of those PCOS issues for women, sorting out some of those hormonal imbalances. What's that been like, and what is that area of the industry like right now? Are there solutions for people that are dealing with these type of issues?
Yeah, people will really come in for a multitude of different reasons that will drive them in. Insulin resistance is huge with PCOS, which means that your blood sugar is dysregulated. And as women, we're kind of taught to have erratic eating habits. Like you'll see a lot of eating disorders around this, and that women don't really eat consistently. So they'll eat a lot, and then they won't eat, and then they'll eat a lot, and then they'll try this new diet. And so they'll be full bore into that. And then a lot of those like up and down swings causes insulin resistance. And I'm sure you're smiling because you can speak to this, right? So really getting the diet right. Some intermittent fasting I've seen has calmed some of that down, which has also been an awesome finding. And
Okay.
then also regulating the hormones and regulating the rest of the system. So sometimes some of these folks are actually on birth control when they come in. So I will
Right.
work around that because they don't want to come off of birth control. Sometimes it's all about lowering the testosterone, figuring out which version of the testosterone is actually high, and lowering that down, and just like getting these women back, because a lot of these folks aren't, they're not having periods, they can't get pregnant, they're having fertility issues, and they're coming in here, I mean, I think a big thing also becomes the emotional piece of that, where they don't feel like women because they can't get pregnant and they don't want to do all these fertility treatments. So, I mean,
Right.
I found that to be huge. And just a lot of times, what I tell women is if I regulate the rest of the body, in about 80% of cases, the hormones will re regulate. And in about 20%, I
Hmm.
actually have to go after the hormones specifically, female reproductive
Got,
hormones.
gotcha. So one of the things you mentioned was intermittent fasting.
Hmm.
What kind of a line is there in the sand for you between the time frames? Like oftentimes people look at intermittent fasting and they're like, oh, I'm just not going to eat till tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
But what kind of strategies do you deploy with your patients?
I try to have patients finish eating at like 6 at night, and then they'll start to eat again at 10 in the morning. But one thing that I'll see with people that are quote unquote intermittent fasting is they're
Yeah.
like, well, I'm intermittent fasting, but I had coffee. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't really, you can't do that. So, I mean, I think, yeah. So coffee actually is going to break that fast. And if you've ever seen your blood sugar on coffee, it spikes.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely going to pull you out of fasting. And I've found, water fasting is actually very, very powerful, but there's a very heavy line with blood sugar dysregulation, especially with
Yeah.
people that are fluctuating in water fasting. So you have to make sure that they're stable enough. But I try to have people eat dinner early and then
Mhm.
wake up and eat a little bit of a later breakfast just to help to re-regulate that, and then eat more consistently throughout the day instead of my last meal is at 10,
Right.
or whatnot. So I'm
Right.
trying to keep a 7 hour window tends to be the best for eating, however that looks for somebody, but not late at night.
Gotcha. So with PCOS specifically, are you finding a diet that is organizing progress for people more than another diet, like more paleo or more keto or anything like that?
So keto is like all the rage right now,
Yeah.
and I definitely think some parts of keto have its merit. With women in my practice that are struggling with PCOS, at this point in time, I've seen it help them gain weight, which a PCOS patient does not want. Found
Right.
with yeah, so with people that have a lot to lose, a lot of weight to lose, it's very, very effective, like 50 pounds or whatnot. But for the most part, in my experience with PCOS, I've also seen liver backups, and
Mhm.
you have to push the detoxification pathways. And these women are not able to absorb and assimilate all that fat because their gallbladder and liver are a little bit backed up. And so they struggle. So I've seen keto with there's two types of PCOS, but with my skinny PCOS patients, which is what I generally see in my practice,
Mhm.
is they gain weight with it. So more of a paleo, not straight paleo. And I guess I want to be clear because for me, paleo doesn't mean sitting down and eating tons and tons of meat.
Yep.
Um, and I think this is sort of a tidbit. I like to experiment on myself and figure out like what works. And when all this keto rage happened, I was super curious. So I got keto. I got strips to see when I was actually in ketosis, and so
Yeah.
I would check my blood sugar and then I would eat protein. And so I could only eat so much protein before I actually got a blood sugar spike in my system. So it's
Right.
not sitting down and having a plate full of meat.
Right.
So that was actually quite interesting for me to see. And I'll tell you for myself personally, I couldn't drop into keto without exogenous ketones or without a day of water fasting. That was just my
Yeah.
experience. And from what I've seen and running this test on patients, I've also not seen them drop into ketosis when you're actually running the blood level strips.
Gotcha.
Not that it's bad, but that's been my experience. I don't know what
Yeah.
you've seen, but that's
Very
what I've
similar.
seen.
Very similar experience. One of the things that I appreciate about having a dynamic ability with recommendations for dietary concerns, that type of stuff is that you can customize for your patient. They don't have to fit the mold of paleo, like traditional paleo 10 years ago. Here's your steak and that's it. They don't have to fit those molds. And I think that dynamic recommendation, kind of as you are talking about here, is going to be key for people moving forward. So if you're listening to this right now and you're a doc, a clinician of some sort, and you're talking about recommending food, like the problem is that even as a clinician, you just want something easy. Just go do this, patient, go do that. And oftentimes that gets us into the weeds, especially when we talk about protein being used to synthesize glucose at some point. That's a huge issue for people. So thank you for bringing that up. That's interesting. What have you seen lately as far as with PCOS and anxiety? There's a connection there that a lot of people are dealing with. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I definitely think there is. They tend to be a lot more anxious. My my opinion has been dysregulation of. I think that first off, I think a lot of these women seem happy with everything else in their life, but very, very stressed out about their health, and so that becomes the main focus of their anxiety, from what I've seen. And Um, you'll see cortisol levels be low throughout the day, and then they'll spike later on. And I don't know if they've had more time to think, if they have more of a reverse cortisol curve, and then they're not sleeping and worrying and constantly anxious. So potentially a cortisol dysregulation, but yeah, there's definitely an anxiety component. Sometimes also, you know, you've spoken about this, but and you're involved with biogenetics, but sometimes actually calming down the neurotransmitters, because most of these folks don't have the correct microbiome or gut biome to have the correct neurotransmitters. So sometimes I will just calm that down until I can get them not so focused on their health. So I just decide which one is more prominent, and then I'll either affect gut or brain health, or a mix of the two. And so until I can just get them into a good spot where they're not constantly worried about it. So
Right.
I have seen GABA dysregulations quite a bit with it, high levels of anxiety.
Interesting. One of the things that you're seeing come out in the medical literature recently is this. This isn't how they're going to describe it. This is how I describe it. This addiction to the chemical reaction associated with emotions, and it's interesting because most of the time people aren't going to choose anxiety. Like if they have an opportunity to choose, I'm going to be peaceful today, or I'm going to just be an anxious mess. They don't want to pick anxious mess, but chemically speaking, their body is oftentimes addicted to that neurotransmitter rush that happens with anxiety. And so their body just continues to produce and produce and produce. And there's something there that will obviously cause a physiology change. And that physiology change walks into your clinic and you're like, all right, what do we do? This lady or this guy is just a mess of emotion. And it's interesting because it's actually a chemical problem. There's this aspect to it that with food, though, you can break. And so you had mentioned with your PCOS patients, a lot of times they're back up with a liver, gallbladder, that type of a situation, the detox system. What type of focus do you look at with the detox system? Is that where you start with people? Is that something later on down the road? What's your opinion there?
Well, first I want to go back to the neurotransmitter point.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever been in this scenario, but I remember when I had a patient come in and literally say, I can't do the diet. I literally can't do the diet. I need sugar. I need carbohydrates. I can't do the diet.
Yeah.
And at that point, I remember, and this was a long time ago, I remember thinking, is this a willpower issue? Is this a problem with
Right.
willpower? Are they cheating? They can't do this. They just need to suck it up and move forward.
Right.
Honestly, that is absolutely not true. So if you've ever increased your stress levels, I'm just going to tell you about my own life. My commute increased 10 minutes each way, so a total of 20 minutes. And I remember walking into my clinic one day, and I love what I do. I'm so passionate and excited about what I do. And I was so exhausted. Like I just didn't feel like I physically had it in me to take care of other people because something was a little bit off in my own personal life. And it was the stress of that commute increasing. And so I was like craving sugar. I had to fight myself to crave sugar. And I realized at that moment that that's what my patients were experiencing. They needed that sugar rush to bump up those neurotransmitters to feel better. And so to me, what I like to do is sometimes to break that cycle with neurotransmitters short term so that I can get people on the proper path. And so, and I like to explain to people that it's not a willpower issue. A lot of times it's a brain gut, a chemical issue. So that's one thing that I see with detox itself, with liver detox. The more that I've seen here, especially where I am, a lot of people are toxed out. So I do like to open up those pathways and get everything going. I'll ask questions first. I'll look at their labs, and so you can gain a lot of insight looking at something on labs called AST and ALT, which are going to be liver enzymes, and so you can gain a lot of insight to see where those are. And so anything over about 21 in men and 19 in women, I actually treat, and I'll also ask additional questions like, how do you metabolize alcohol? Well, I get drunk really fast, or I will have one glass of wine and I am really, really struggling, or I have a hangover the next day, or I can't handle this, or when I have fatty food, I'm really sick. And so also like looking at the digestive components to how they handle and absorb fat. Oh, I did keto and I gained 10 pounds.
Right.
So yeah, so I will ultimately address that. The other thing that I look at is how sensitive are you to smell? Like, I want to know how glutathione is working in the overall system. Like how sensitive are they to chemicals or whatnot? And so, yeah, so detoxification, I feel like, if you don't have the detox pathways working, and when you start to do a protocol with somebody, they're going to be constipated, they're going to be backed up, they're going to feel bad, and they're going to start losing all kinds of hair because there's so much chemical toxicity going on. So, yeah, I definitely start there.
Let's go back a little bit to the sense of smell. Can you expound upon that for the listeners here?
Yeah, so something that has been more anecdotal, I think, through the years of practice has been sense of smell can be a lot of times an issue with having chemical sensitivities. So a couple things I've seen in my practice with sense of smell, or people that have problems with sense of smell, a lot of times you'll either see that it happens after some sort of infection like a virus or a flu or something, and the patient will say, I just suddenly lost my sense of smell at that point.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times they'll talk about, I had very severe chemical toxicity and then I lost my sense of smell, etc. And so for me, I look at, either an infection or potentially glutathione backup. And you'll see liver enzymes be an issue on labs.
Gotcha. So what do you mean by glutathione backup specifically?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I just kind of ranted on that one. You won't be producing glutathione.
Gotcha.
As well. And so that's a major antioxidant in our body that we naturally produce. And so I will just help them to support their body. And a lot of times I'll use glutathione, especially when I'm doing some sort of quote unquote detoxification, metal detoxification, whatever you want to say, because you want to support their body, right?
Right.
I think the old thinking or the old literature, and I don't know what you think about this, but is to do IVs, EDTA, and DMPS. And from what I've seen in the literature, and I don't know how it's changed, like about 2 years ago, is that it's very dangerous for the patient because it ends up being reabsorbed a lot of times in the brain. And you mobilize a bunch of things that you can't get rid of at one time. And so for my opinion on detoxification is exercise, sweating, saunas,
That's right.
opening up the detox pathways, making sure they're having a bowel movement every day. All those things,
Right.
I think, and your body is going to naturally get rid of that.
That's right. There's another aspect that I think is really cool with detoxification. Early on in my career, I completely ignored it, but now, and it's kidney function. And kidney function, there's so many people that they don't drink enough water during the day, right? Nobody knows how much am I supposed to drink versus the person next to me. Nobody's measuring that. Um, but people don't drink enough water, and we end up not using one of our three main detox systems, and the kidneys are just sitting there like, what do you want me to do? And it's super important. I think that is a huge key. A lot of issues I've seen in practice can be solved by a patient committing to drinking water. And especially people as they get older, they detoxify less and less, and they're not drinking as much water because they don't want to go to the bathroom 42 times a day. And it's an interesting situation. So
Absolutely. And
yeah.
also, what do you see in practice? Do you see that people, I've noticed a trend, and I'm curious what you see. Do you notice that people that are very sick don't sweat?
Yeah, that's a huge thing, especially in your area where it's such a dry climate. I would imagine it's even less. Like I live in the humidity belt in Minnesota,
That's
and
true.
it's like the sweating situation. If they don't end up with stained armpits on their white t-shirts, right? Like I question that. And you look at, if somebody's ill and they have pathologies that have already been diagnosed and they don't end up with those stains, the question is how are you getting rid of all of the garbage that your body needs to remove? If that's not happening through sweat, and it's not happening through the kidneys because they're not complaining about going to the bathroom all the time. So you start looking and putting these things together, and it's an interesting thing. Do you recommend like infrared saunas and that type of stuff with your patient?
I do like whatever I can get the patient to do to sweat, I'm a huge fan of. I personally own a far infrared sauna.
Yeah.
The places, it's a little hard. I don't know why far infrared saunas are hard here to find.
Yeah.
There's not tons of them. So I just go wherever I can get them access to, whether that's just at a gym to sweat out. But yeah,
Yeah.
I personally really have seen the benefits of far infrared saunas and just regular saunas. My goal is generally to get people sweating and removing
Yeah.
that toxicity.
Like an everyday situation, or do you twice
I,
a
ju-
week?
I would say 3 times a week is generally fine, 3 to 4.
Okay, cool. What's your favorite area right now to help people with? Like other than PCOS, what's the thing that you look at and you go, man, if I had 100 patients next week with this issue, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I see mostly autoimmune thyroid in my
Okay.
practice.
Yeah.
Is a big thing. I also see a lot of infections, which I think goes along with autoimmune thyroid. That's generally been what's walked into my practice or what I've
Yeah.
attracted in here. So that's been quite interesting. Um,
Yeah. Let's
so
talk about the dynamics between those two things. So we have autoimmunity on one side. We have something fueling the immune system on the other side. What's the crosstalk like there, and what are some of the balances that you see that have to be organized?
Yeah, so when I'm looking at the thyroid or looking at a blood test to see what's going on with the thyroid gland, you're going to see a multitude of different things happening in the system. I feel like it's not, people come in and say, my thyroid's off. Can we fix that?
Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit bigger than that scenario. So if you're looking at basic blood work, generally if the thyroid is quote unquote off,
Hmm.
um, you've got other problems. You have neurotransmitter issues where people are very emotional. I think a common thread that I have seen with autoimmune thyroid is it's primarily women,
Hmm.
especially with Hashimoto's. And I don't work with a lot of Graves. I've seen probably 1 to 2 Graves patients.
Yeah.
So I'm primarily talking all about Hashimoto's. So you'll see women, and they tend to be these hardcore driving women, type A, push it. I put everybody else in front of me except for myself. And so they literally have nothing left for themselves at the end of the day. So one of the first things is educating these patients about self-care, taking care of themselves. Most of these women are fairly educated, and they know about diet. You'll have to make some tweaks to their diet, but I have not found that diet is like, oh, if we take them off of, say, wheat, then suddenly they're going to be fixed. Yeah, it's a component, it's a contributor. I like to do an elimination diet just to see if there's anything else that is moving forward. I will run the Cyrex lab testing, and for you guys that know or don't know, I'll just explain it. They have two arrays for food sensitivities, not food allergies, but food sensitivities. And in these cases, most of these folks have infections when they have Hashimoto's. So I have been burned a couple times on the thyroid or on the Cyrex testing because they have a upregulated or downregulated immune system. And so since then, Cyrex has put into play where they're testing the immune system along with these tests, which is fantastic. But I've seen, like, I've gotten tests back where people are allergic to everything, and I can't or sensitive to everything, and I can't show them that test. Or I'll get tests back where they literally have nothing going on. So, so I feel like initially I like to start with an elimination diet just to see what's going on. And that will tend to show the major sensitivities, and people will feel a lot better. The other side of things, so I support the entire system. So I will support, liver function always tends to be a problem. And it really depends on what's going on with the case. A lot of times inflammation can be a problem. Sometimes they have gut bugs going on. Sometimes they have an overgrowth of, say, like candida. It'll depend on the case. Every case is a little bit different. But one thing that I do see is that there tends to be a triggering event for this. Like, their husband lost their job, they had a baby, and their mom died. Like, it all happened. And then, to me, what I have theorized has happened is their immune system just tanks because of all the stress. And then suddenly they're fatigued and they just don't feel good and they're irritable and etc. And they can't get out of bed, and now they're on antidepressants and whatever else. So I will tend to go after the virus, believe it or not. So I will see what happens when I will start to treat and upregulate their immune system. And that has actually worked for me. It's pretty, you'll hear conflicting things about Epstein-Barr. You'll hear people say, 95% of the population has Epstein-Barr. I agree with that. They probably do, but it's the immune system has become compromised in these cases to allow the dysregulation or the autoimmunity. And as we talk about Hashimoto's or autoimmune thyroid, it's an autoimmune issue.
Yeah. How are you specifically addressing EBV with people?
It depends on the case. So the literature states that vitamin C is very, very powerful. You'll see the IgG and IgM on lab work go down, and their symptoms will reduce. So a lot of people will use intravenous vitamin C. I use sublingual vitamin C. I think it's equally as powerful, and I've seen huge results. I will tell my patients that it'll probably take about 10 rounds. I can generally get it done in 5, but sometimes it'll take about 10 rounds to get that done. So that's been one thing I found. The other thing that I have done in practice, and this sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And it just depends on how they're presenting a lot of times, especially if they're having herpes flares, like simplex 1, simplex 2. I will treat with monolaurin, which is a derivative of coconut oil, and then I will do something like that's a biofilm buster, like serapeptidase. Some people like interphase. I personally don't. I haven't seen it work for me, but some people really do like that. So, I mean, you look at biofilm busters of some sort, and I found that can be pretty helpful, especially when there's gut issues. And then Sometimes I've even gone after, for example, with lysine. So a lot of those I've seen be pretty helpful, and then I will rotate it through
Yeah,
depending on how they're responding.
that's cool. Do you, like right now, when you look at what people are dealing with in the autoimmune world, and we're kind of getting into that here, um, where do you think it's headed? Where do you think functional medicine specifically is headed? Have we reached the top of, how quickly we can expand and help people? Or do you think that there's still more there for us to learn to help people turn these genetic expressions off?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think we've peaked. I learn more and more and more every day. As I sit in the literature, I feel like I can do more and more with natural medicine. I think it's very, very powerful. Our bodies are meant to heal, and it's just about finding the right tools, finding the right information. Sometimes it's about running different tests, but for the most part, for me, I can get so much information by running simple CBC, CMP tests to see like
Mhm.
where their immune system is functioning. Sometimes I go beyond that, depending on where I'm stuck on the case.
Right.
But no, I certainly don't think we've peaked. Do you think we have?
I don't think we have either. I think as we go, there's going to be more and more information about epigenetics, and I think there are going to be more tools surrounding those epigenetics. Homeopathy back in the day, they were like the super quacks, right? And then you had chiropractors that are the quacks, and then you kind of move on down the line here. But I think homeopathy is going to be having some different applications in the future, and as we understand epigenetics more and more thoroughly. So I think that's a huge area of it. Um, the other thing, and I don't know a ton about the research on this right now, but from a pathology standpoint, but the other thing is going to be all of the radio stuff that's going on, all the radio frequencies, et cetera. So just being bathed in something that's chemically stressful or like physically stressful. Have you seen any of that type of stuff out in your area?
So what we're seeing in here, and I think everything is going. I'm assuming you're also talking about like the cell phone
Yeah.
waves and the
Yeah.
EMFs and all of that. I'm starting to get more and more interested in that and how to mitigate those.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen with 5G. I think, with the opening up of 5G, that's a problem. In Denver itself, what we're seeing, like for the cell towers, is they're going into office buildings and they're setting up little hubs of towers. And so on the
Yeah.
top of every office building, they've got this. So they're not just these one cell site anymore. It's just all
Yeah.
of this. And I do believe some of that is affecting us. To what degree? I mean, I'm sure that that's changing our genetic expression.
Hmm.
We've gone through and tried to levy this, talk to the state and see what the regulations are. In Colorado, literally, it's a wild, wild west. Like we have no
Yeah.
regulations on it. So your office can be right next door to a Verizon cell site, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that that's a problem, and I think that is going to change genetic expression, and I also think that that's going to give us, you know, um, you know, brain cancer is probably a huge one. I've seen um, there's a couple of super fun sites out here, and I have seen like elevated prolactin levels,
Hmm.
indicating probably more in the line of a brain tumor that hasn't
Yeah.
been seen yet. But yeah, I mean, I think those chemicals, those environmental toxicities, those affect us pretty
Yeah.
seriously.
I don't know a lot about it right now, but it is super interesting to me. And I think it's like anything where like people are going to cry wolf at the beginning of it, right? And then we get more information about it and it won't be as bad as everybody says it's going to be. But it's not like a zero risk situation like the other side says. It'll be somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Typically, that's how things work out that I see from a public health standpoint. When you look at like moving people as a population toward wellness in the future, do you think that it's going to be more of a doctor setting like you're in right now, a clinical setting that moves people in that right direction? Or do you think there's some way that people are going to be inspired to awaken to responsibility? Because that's really what your practice is based off of, I would imagine, is responsibility. Patients got to take responsibility.
Yeah, I think in the current medical model, it has been one pill fixes this problem. So there's
Mhm.
been no accountability, no responsibility. Doctor, come in, give me a pill. Doctor, come in, give me surgery. It's more of a passive approach. And so
Sure.
we have not in America, I think, as we become more and more ADD, I have not seen that change with Instagram and everything else. In fact,
Hmm.
the generation that's coming up, I think is really, I think it's very challenging for them. I don't envy the generation that they're in because you hear them with, for example, influencers on Instagram or whatnot. And I think about like my generation when, for example, you would see these beautiful models on the front of magazines, right?
Right.
And they were just so fabulous, and you didn't know that they were airbrushed or whatnot. And I'll never forget when Jenny McCarthy went on somewhere and there was a picture of her and she took a Sharpie and just like basically said, I was airbrushed here, here, here. And by the end of it, the entire picture was black. And so I feel
Uh,
like we're having a resurge, and I'm seeing a resurge in like the younger population, for example, with Instagram and influencers and like trying to keep up with the Joneses, and every slumber party is
yeah.
documented on social media. And I feel like they have different stressful problems where I still don't feel like it's a situation where we're taking responsibility. I feel like it's a situation of too much information and not enough knowledge.
Interesting. So it's like the difference between volume and quality. Um, I think that's a huge thing with food too. Maybe it's just an expansion of our entire healthcare issue. The dopamine addiction that people end up with when they're getting, like, everybody wants the likes, right? You want the likes, you want the thumbs up button happening. Um, the dopamine response that happens with that, constantly raising the bar. My question is ultimately what happens to your health when you're so addicted to dopamine but you can't produce enough. Where does that go? That's the question for me. And I see it. I have two little kids right now, and I see it with them. They, part of their process and education right now is using iPads to educate, and like doing their math problems on an iPad, and it's like an educational video game. And I go, this is crazy, because ultimately, are they going to be able to sit down and look at a piece of paper and use it? Can they still do that? Like, does their brain allow that to happen? So it's just, I see that taking place.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see what actually ends up happening with the research from the iPads and the
Yeah.
cell phones and the constant and all of the social media and the dopamine dumps. But yeah, people really struggle with dopamine these days. They really, really struggle. You see it on every neurotransmitter form.
Hmm.
People are pretty dopamine deficient. It's just,
Well, not only that, but like the level that their brain is set at for usage. So you look at basal ganglia issues where people get tremors, and even doing the finger tapping test, can they keep it organized, that type of thing. um, when those basal ganglia start to downsize, right, oftentimes it's not just that there's like an infarct or a small vessel disease and stuff like that. Oftentimes those receptors are so addicted to dopamine, like it's like a dopamine resistance situation, like insulin resistance, and that leads toward a lot of the neurologic issue. Like, how many times do you see tremors in your clinic now, when, like, I remember when I first started, I might see one a month, and it's like every other person has a tremor. It's crazy what's happening. It's
yep,
crazy.
it's pretty common, and you see it across the board. I mean, even in young people, they're very, very dopamine deficient
Yeah.
already. I mean, it's just constant,
Yep.
constant.
So it's to me, it's funny, because how do you fix insulin resistance, right? Well, you basically create a lifestyle where insulin isn't needed as much, and the body will reacclimate. Well, it's the same thing with dopamine. What do? Go camping, go hiking. I don't know. Put your phones away, and you will see some level of progress with people, especially when it comes to the basal ganglia, the ability to focus, all of that. It's super interesting. Little kids, for sure. So it's really interesting to me. Like, go play baseball, right? So
There was this documentary on people that were addicted to their phones. I don't know if you saw this, but it was interesting. They basically, to rehab this, so first off, the experiment they ran was this woman texted this man that was sitting in front of the computer writing a blog for a long amount, and she kept on texting him over and over and over again, and his phone was across the room, and he heard it going off, and he knew it was her, but you could actually see his stress hormone rising, cortisol. He was actually getting very stressed out, even though he knew it was her texting. And their actually rehab or detox for it was to go be in a cabin in the woods and like basically be in a I think it was for 2 weeks or something. And you saw this guy struggling as he was hiking, and it was just so interesting to me. But I know for me, I'm a mountain gal, and I'm always out in the mountains, and I'm always skiing and, whatnot, hiking, biking, whatever, you name it. And that is the biggest reset for me. Like that's a huge piece of my lifestyle. And I think it keeps me really well balanced. I know when I haven't been out in the mountains.
Absolutely. So cool. When you look at the generation, we talk about little kids and that type of stuff. I know your practice is mostly focused on the autoimmune aspects. What are some of the things that people can help their children with right now to avoid expression of those genes that are allowing autoimmunity? What are some of the things that we can do with little kids?
Well, I think one of the research studies that came out was, for example, if you're a pregnant mom and you have undiagnosed autoimmune disease, your child is probably going to be more likely to have some sort of autoimmunity. So, I mean, I think the first step starts by taking care of yourself, like making sure that you feel good, especially before you're getting pregnant. And that doesn't mean, hey, if you're having trouble getting pregnant, there's something that's off in your body. Your body stops you from getting pregnant for a reason. There's nothing wrong with you as a woman, but something in your blood work probably simply has to be tweaked. And then it's the ease of pregnant or getting pregnant is boom, and then healthy children, even with full-blown autoimmune disease, as long as it's managed, right? So I think that's the first tip. The second thing is all about where you're sourcing your food from. I think sourcing food, starting kids at an early age about, not eating like junk food, right? Breastfeeding is very, very important. Also, what you're eating as a mother is very important. If your child has a rash and is breastfeeding, you're probably eating something that your child is allergic to for the breastfeeding piece of that. I would say that so those are some of the things. Also, getting your kids outside to play is really important. A lot of holistic ophthalmologists talk about we are converged with our brains and with our eyes, which is looking at a iPad all day or whatnot, and creating that eye, like a divergence actually is going outside and taking a hike and playing in the mountains and having your kid play in mud and not leaving your kid in a bubble, watching out for antibiotics. I mean, that's a huge thing. I'll never forget, actually, we were sitting around, I was with a couple friends, and we were just chatting about one of my friends was like, yeah, I've literally never taken an antibiotic in my life. And this guy is the best athlete you've ever seen. He can eat like a horse. He has no food sensitivities, very well-versed across the board. And, on the other side of things, like his wife had multiple antibiotics all the way growing through. She had sinus infections, and now she struggled with autoimmune diseases. And you can see that parallel, not that you should never take antibiotics, but be careful not to overdo the antibiotics. Be careful where you're sourcing your food from. Be careful, making sure your kid's eating vegetables, getting plenty of water is important. Having a bowel movement, watch all of those things. Like, is your kid chronically sick?
That's right. That's right. Well, that's cool. The thing I get excited about is the applications that the generation behind me and behind you that's coming up right now, going through school, getting educated about natural health care. The applications they're going to have access to are going to revolutionize how we view health. And I'm so excited about that. I feel like the generation before me has been developing a lot of the tools, but the generation behind me is going to get to use those tools for good. And I'm just so excited about where all of this is headed. I think the quality of life is going to continue to go up. And it's not with knowledge. The quality of life is going to go up with responsibility. And I think that's the cool part. So I just get it. So anyway, yeah.
Right. And I think with the epigenetics, I mean, as we're starting, I mean, that is very, very new right now. We're just trying to figure things
Mhm.
out. I mean, I think a lot of people have heard about like the MTHFR gene or whatnot. And, that's kind of been the biggest thing in practice, like what you're expressing and what you're not. And then that can actually revolutionize how you're taking supplements, what you need to not express certain genes or
Mhm.
whatnot. And we're going to have a much better idea of how to do supplements, like where somebody's dominant, where somebody's deficient, and being able to do that with much more ease instead of it just being it's a little challenging sometimes to make sure you're not doing any harm to the patient initially, because supplements across the board aren't safe. You can't you know just give them whatever, like some of the things that are being sold, like, and no disrespect to some of these companies, but some of the multi-level marketing where they're saying, oh, these things are safe, and you'll have a patient come in and they're taking like some of these multi-level marketing supplements, and they're stimulating their immune system too much.
That's
They're
right.
not across the board safe, and having to explain that is, can is a little bit
Right.
dicey.
Yes, it's a good product, but is it good for you is the
Exactly.
question. That
Exactly.
and I think with a lot of that type or that side of the supplement industry, it's the immune system is key. Like the people have not understood immune drivers, and they're just playing percentages, right? Like just because it's good for 70% of the population doesn't mean it's ultimately going to be helpful for you. What if you're in that 30% category? And we see that for sure, for sure, as just being able to teach in the supplement industry as I do. It's everywhere. It's almost mind numbing. Everybody's got an idea, and most of the time the ideas are with a good heart, with like good intentions. But the actual execution of it is sometimes interesting. So,
I agree.
all right. Well, Dr. Barter, I really appreciate you spending attention with us today. This is awesome. I appreciate and I value your opinion. And by the way, you're a good podcast guest. You should do a lot more of this.
Thank you so much. This was
Yeah.
so fun. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I really like your podcast. You're getting such great information out there, and so I'm just honored to be on the show with you today.